The night air outside the old city hall was thick with whispers and cigarette smoke. A line of men in tailored suits and dark coats wound around the building, their faces half hidden by the glow of expensive lighters. The building itself looked abandoned from the outside. Cracked windows, faded paint, an old sign that read Hawthorne Storage and Supply. But everyone in town knew what went on inside. Everyone knew, and no one dared to speak about it. Inside, under dim chandeliers that swung slightly with the draft, a crowd had gathered in a wide room that once served as a warehouse. Wooden crates lined the walls, stacked high like towers of silence. A low murmur ran through the audience, voices of greed, hunger, and power. In the center of the room stood a small platform draped with red velvet. It looked almost like a stage, except the performance that night wasn't entertainment. It was cruelty wrapped in luxury. A man in a white suit stepped onto the platform, slick hair gleaming under the yellow lights. He was tall, confident, his smile sharp as a blade. "Gentlemen," he announced, raising a hand. "Welcome to another exclusive evening." The room quieted instantly. The only sound was the shuffle of boots and the faint hum of the ventilation. "Tonight," the man continued, "we have something truly extraordinary." A curtain at the back of the platform was pulled aside, and she appeared. The moment Ilara stepped into the light, the room seemed to inhale as one. She wore a simple white dress, torn at the edges, her wrists bound with silk rope. The fabric clung to her like it was afraid to let go. Her long hair, tangled and damp, fell across her shoulders, framing a face that was too pure for the wickedness that surrounded her. Her eyes darted across the room, green, frightened, and alive. Every man there saw beauty, but none of them saw her fear. The auctioneer spread his arms theatrically. "The most beautiful flower we've ever presented," he said, his voice dripping with charm. "A virgin untouched by sin from the mountain villages of the north. Look at her, pure as snow." Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and heavy. Ilara flinched at every sound. From the back of the room, a man stood in the shadows, his hands clenched into fists inside worn leather gloves. His name was Daniel Hart. He wasn't dressed like the others, no suit, no cologne, no arrogance. Just a brown jacket, faded jeans, and boots still dusted with the earth of the ranch he worked on. He had come here for one reason, to find his daughter Lily, who had gone missing 2 days ago. The police said they were looking into it, but Daniel had learned not to trust the words of men who'd never lost something they loved. So he followed rumors, dark ones about a place where the innocent disappeared, where money could buy silence. He hadn't come to bid. He hadn't come to buy. He had come to destroy. The auctioneer snapped his fingers. "Let's begin. Starting bid, $5,000. The sound of voices rose at once, men calling numbers like gamblers around a table. 5,000, 6, 8. Each number louder than the last. Each one a nail in the coffin of Ilara's freedom. Daniel's jaw tightened. His heart hammered against his ribs. The girl on stage, Ilara, wasn't his daughter. He knew that. But something about the way she trembled, the way her lips pressed together like she was holding back a scream, broke something inside him. She could have been Lily in a few years. A girl with a future turned into a transaction. Ilara's breathing quickened as the bidding climbed higher. Her mind tried to escape the room, to remember the smell of her mother's bread, the songs of the valley she came from, but every sound dragged her back into the nightmare. The auctioneer's voice was a whip. 9,000. Do I hear 9,5? A man near the front raised his hand lazily. 10,000. The crowd murmured approval. The auctioneer grinned. 10,000. Sold to... Wait. The word wasn't loud, but it sliced through the room like a blade. Every head turned toward the back. Daniel had stepped out of the shadows. His voice was steady, low, and dangerous. "I'll pay 15. The room went silent. The auctioneer's grin faltered, then widened again as if he enjoyed the drama. 15,000 from the gentleman in the back. Several men turned to stare at Daniel. He didn't look like someone with $15,000 to spare. His face was tired, his eyes bloodshot. But the way he stood, unmoving, unafraid, made the room hesitate. Ilara looked at him for the first time. Something in his eyes stopped her tears. They weren't hungry like the others. They were searching, like he was trying to remember something he'd lost long ago. The auctioneer raised his gavel, tapping it once. 15,000 going once. A man in a gray coat shouted, 20! Daniel's pulse raced. He didn't have 20. Hell, he barely had 15. But this wasn't about money anymore. This was about what was right. He stepped forward, voice rising. 30. Gasps filled the air. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed. 30,000 going once. Going twice. Daniel's mind screamed at him to stop. His bank account was a joke. His truck was breaking down. His ranch barely survived each winter, but his heart wouldn't let him walk away. Sold. The gavel struck the wood. The sound rang out like thunder. Ilara collapsed to her knees, tears spilling down her face. The auctioneer gestured to 2 guards. Untie her. The gentleman can collect his purchase. Daniel stepped forward as they cut her loose. When she stumbled, he caught her before she hit the ground. She flinched at his touch, then looked up, confused. Why, she whispered. He met her eyes. Because no one should ever be for sale. The guards exchanged a glance but said nothing. Daniel handed over the envelope of cash he'd brought, every dollar he owned, and then some. The auctioneer counted it with a smirk. Pleasure doing business, he said, pocketing the money. Daniel wrapped his jacket around Ilara's shoulders and led her toward the door. The crowd parted as they passed, whispering. Some smirked, others glared, but none dared stop him. Outside, the night air hit like a blessing. Ilara gasped, her breath turning white in the cold. For the first time in weeks, she saw stars instead of walls. Daniel opened the passenger door of his truck and helped her in. She sat stiffly, clutching his jacket like armor. He climbed in beside her, started the engine, and pulled away from the building. For a while, neither spoke. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless. Ilara finally turned to him. You really paid for me? He nodded once, eyes fixed on the road. I didn't pay for you, he said quietly. I paid to get you out, her lips trembled. Then what will you do with me? He sighed, whatever you want. You're free now. She stared at him as if the word free was foreign. Her whole life had been dictated, first by the men who took her village, then by the ones who bought her. The concept of choice was something she'd forgotten existed. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He hadn't planned this far ahead. He'd only followed his instinct, his anger, his grief. But as he glanced at her, small, fragile, shivering under his coat, he knew one thing. He couldn't let her go back to the world that had tried to sell her. Behind them, the city lights faded into the distance. The building they left behind returned to silence, but not peace. Inside, the auctioneer poured himself a drink, staring out the window into the dark. He smiled faintly. That man, he muttered, is going to be trouble. On the highway, Daniel's truck rumbled like an old heartbeat. The air smelled of pine and rain. Ilara's eyes grew heavy, exhaustion finally catching up to her. But just before she drifted into sleep, she whispered, Thank you. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to, because deep down he knew. Tonight wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. And though he didn't know it, the choice he made that night would change both their lives forever. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The image of the girl, Ilara, kneeling under those cruel lights refused to leave his mind. Even after he'd driven miles away from that cursed building, her trembling voice and terrified eyes haunted him. He parked the truck outside an old roadside diner, its neon sign flickering weakly against the fog. The air smelled like rain and gasoline. Ilara sat in the passenger seat, half asleep, her head resting against the window. He watched her for a long time, trying to understand what he had just done. He hadn't planned to buy anyone. He hadn't even brought enough money to do it. The $15,000 had been meant to pay off a debt, to keep his ranch from being repossessed. Now every dollar of it was gone, but as he looked at her sleeping form, small and fragile under his jacket, he realized he didn't regret it. Not yet. When dawn broke, he started the engine again. The diner owner, an old woman with kind eyes, watched from the window as the truck rolled away, her coffee cup steaming in her hand. She had seen Daniel before. He was known in the area as the quiet rancher who kept to himself, a widower raising his little girl alone. But today there was someone else with him, and the look in his eyes wasn't one of calm. It was fire. Ilara stirred when the truck hit a bump. She blinked, disoriented, her gaze landing on Daniel's profile. He looked exhausted, his face shadowed with stubble and worry. Where are we going? She asked softly. He didn't look at her. Somewhere safe. Safe? The word rolled off her tongue like something distant, foreign. There is no such place, she murmured. Daniel's jaw tightened. There is, he said quietly. I'll make sure of it. She looked at him for a long moment, trying to read his expression, but all she saw was a storm behind his eyes. Finally, she turned away, watching the trees blur past the window. They drove for hours in silence. The morning sun rose higher, spilling golden light across the mountains. Fields stretched out endlessly, dotted with old barns and grazing cattle. Somewhere a radio crackled with news of another missing girl. Daniel turned it off. His thoughts drifted to his daughter, Lily, 8 years old, bright as morning, always asking questions. 2 days ago she had disappeared from the schoolyard. One moment she was chasing her friend across the grass. The next she was gone. The police had found her backpack near a van that no one claimed to have seen. Daniel had torn the town apart looking for her. He'd followed every lead, every whisper. That's what had brought him to that warehouse last night, to that damned auction. He had expected to find monsters. He hadn't expected to find Alara. At noon he pulled over near a small stream to rest. Alara got out slowly, still unsteady on her feet. She walked a few steps, then crouched by the water, cupping it in her hands. She drank greedily, splashing her face. The cold hit her skin, and for a brief moment she felt human again. Daniel leaned against the truck, watching her. There was something delicate about her movements. Graceful, almost fragile, but beneath it a strength. She had survived something no one should have to survive. That alone made her stronger than most. She caught him staring and straightened, wiping her mouth. "You shouldn't have done it," she said. He frowned. "Done what?" "Paid for me. They'll come for you. For both of us." He pushed off the truck, stepping closer. "Let them come." Her brow furrowed. "You don't understand who they are." Daniel's voice hardened. "And they don't understand who I am." For a moment their eyes locked. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine. Alara looked away first, her voice trembling. "You're going to get yourself killed." He gave a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Wouldn't be the first time someone tried. They ate little that day. Some bread and water Daniel had packed before leaving home. Alara barely touched hers. The bruises on her arms were darker now, purpling against pale skin. He noticed but didn't comment. She didn't need pity. She needed dignity. When they got back on the road, Daniel finally broke the silence. "Where are you from?" She hesitated. "A village north of here. My father was a woodcutter. We were poor but happy." Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. "One day men came. They said they were offering jobs in the city. I wanted to help my family, so I went." Daniel could hear the rest without her saying it. "She never made it to the city." Alara's fingers twisted in her lap. "They took us to a warehouse. There were others, girls, some younger than me. They said we'd work in hotels. Instead, they locked us up. Sold us like—" She stopped, biting her lip until it bled. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles whitened. "How long were you there?" "I don't know. Weeks, maybe months." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "I stopped counting after a while." He wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt useless. What comfort could possibly heal what she'd endured? He swallowed hard. "You're safe now," he said finally, though the words felt weak even to him. She gave a small, bitter laugh. "No one is ever safe." By evening, they reached the outskirts of his hometown. The roads turned familiar. The rusted fences, the fields of wildflowers, the distant outline of his small ranch against the fading sun. As they approached, Daniel's chest tightened. Every shadow made him think of Lily. Every empty window reminded him of her laughter. Alara noticed the change in him. "You have someone," she said quietly. He nodded, not taking his eyes off the road. "My daughter." "She's missing," Alara guessed softly. Daniel's silence was answer enough. They pulled into the gravel driveway as night began to fall. The farmhouse looked lonely, its porch light flickering weakly. Alara stepped out, the cool air wrapping around her like a whisper. Crickets sang in the tall grass. For the first time in months, she wasn't behind locked doors. Daniel unlocked the front door, the hinges creaking. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. "You can stay here for now," he said, motioning to the small living room. "The spare room's at the end of the hall. Bathroom's across from it." Alara hesitated in the doorway. "Why are you helping me?" He paused, his hand still on the doorknob. "Because I couldn't help my wife," he said quietly. "And I'm not going to make that mistake again." Something in his tone made her stop asking questions. She nodded slowly and stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet. On the wall hung a picture, a woman with kind eyes holding a little girl with bright pigtails. Ilara felt her throat tighten. "She's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at the photo. She was. They both were. Later that night, after Ilara had gone to her room, Daniel sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone. He wanted to call the police, to report what he'd seen at that auction house, but he knew better. The men who ran that place had connections. The wrong call could bring them right to his door. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, hands trembling slightly. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. He looked up and saw Ilara standing in the hallway, wrapped in a blanket. Her hair was still damp from the shower. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces." He motioned to the chair across from him. "Sit," she did. The clock on the wall ticked softly between them. "Do you have any family?" he asked. She hesitated. "I had a brother. He went to look for me. I don't know if he's still alive." Daniel nodded slowly. "We'll find out." Her eyes widened. "Why would you do that?" "You don't even know me." He took a long breath, his voice rough when he finally spoke. "Because I do know what it feels like to lose someone." They sat in silence for a while, the air heavy but calm. For the first time since he'd met her, Ilara's shoulders eased slightly. She stared at him across the table, at this man who had risked everything for a stranger. There was something about him, something solid like the earth itself. When she finally spoke again, her voice was soft. "They'll come for me. For you too." Daniel met her gaze. "Let them try." Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but inside, for a fleeting moment, there was peace. Ilara stood to leave, but paused in the doorway. "You remind me of my father," she said quietly. Daniel's throat tightened. "Then he must have been a good man." She smiled faintly. "He was." When she was gone, Daniel leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The night stretched long and still. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe danger. Maybe death. But as the house fell silent, he knew one thing. He would not let anyone hurt that girl again, and somewhere deep down, beneath all his exhaustion and grief, a spark began to burn. He had gone to that auction searching for his daughter. He hadn't found her. But maybe, just maybe, he had found a reason to keep fighting. The sun was just beginning to rise over the pines when Daniel woke. The first light of morning crept across the wooden floorboards, soft and golden, touching everything with a kind of quiet grace. For a moment he forgot where he was, what had happened, and then he heard it. The soft sound of footsteps down the hall. He turned toward the doorway and saw Ilara standing there, her hair tangled, wearing one of his old flannel shirts that hung loosely on her frame. She looked fragile, but there was a flicker of something new in her eyes. A question, perhaps, or a sliver of peace. "Morning," Daniel said, his voice rough from sleep. She nodded hesitantly. I didn't mean to wake you." "I was looking for water." He pointed toward the sink. "Glasses are in the cupboard." Ilara moved quietly, her bare feet soundless on the wood. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly. Daniel watched as she took slow sips like someone learning how to be gentle again. "You can sit," he said softly, gesturing to the chair across from him. She hesitated, then sat down, folding her hands in her lap. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The morning birds sang outside, filling the silence between them. "Do you always wake up this early?" she asked finally. He nodded. "The animals don't wait for anyone." A faint smile touched her lips, the first real one he'd seen. "You have animals? Cows, a few horses, chickens that think they own the place." He tried to make his tone light, and to his surprise she gave a small laugh, a real, soft laugh that warmed the air between them. "I used to have a goat," she said after a moment. "He would always escape his pen and eat my mother's flowers. She'd chase him with a broom, but he never cared." Daniel smiled faintly. "Sounds like a smart goat." She nodded, her eyes distant. "His name was Miro." The smile faded, replaced by quiet sadness. "He's probably gone now." "Everything is." Daniel looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Not everything. Their eyes met. She held his gaze for a heartbeat, then looked away, afraid of what she might see there. After breakfast, Daniel went outside to tend to the animals. Ilara followed him, keeping a respectful distance, her bare feet brushing through the dewy grass. The morning smelled of hay and pine. The sun climbed higher, painting the sky in soft golds and pinks. Daniel filled the horse's trough, the muscles in his arms tensing as he lifted the heavy bucket. Ilara watched him, the way he moved with quiet precision, like a man who'd done this every day of his life. He didn't speak much, but every gesture, steady, deliberate, seemed to tell a story. "Do you do this alone?" she asked after a while. He nodded. "Since my wife passed," she hesitated. "How long ago?" 5 years. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shrugged, setting the bucket down. "We were young." "She got sick?" "Nothing anyone could do." He stared out at the horizon, his jaw tight. "I thought I'd lost everything back then. Then Lily came along and I realized maybe God hadn't taken everything away, just gave me something different to fight for." At the sound of his daughter's name, something flickered in Ilara's expression. "Lily," she repeated softly as if testing the word. He nodded. "She's 8. Smartest kid I've ever met. You'll like her." Ilara hesitated. "If she's still—" "She is," he said quickly, his tone firm, unwilling to let the alternative hang in the air. "She has to be." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred the grass. A hawk circled high above them, its shadow drifting across the field. Ilara finally whispered, "You saved me, but you were looking for her, weren't you?" Daniel froze, his back still to her. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Yeah, I thought I might find her there." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I wish I could tell you something, anything." He turned to her, shaking his head. "You don't owe me that." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "No one's ever done something like that for me before." Daniel met her gaze, steady and gentle. "Then it's about damn time someone did." That afternoon, the sky turned gray, clouds rolling in from the mountains. A storm was coming. Daniel worked to cover the hay bales with a tarp, while Ilara stood on the porch watching the wind whip through the trees. For the first time in months, she felt something close to safety. The air smelled like rain instead of sweat and fear. The wind sounded like freedom instead of chains. When the first drops began to fall, Daniel came running toward the house, his shirt soaked through. Ilara opened the door just as thunder cracked across the valley. He stepped inside, shaking off the rain. "Guess you get the full countryside experience," he said with a grin. She handed him a towel, trying not to smile. "Do storms come often here?" "Pretty regular, but they pass fast." He rubbed his hair dry, then looked at her seriously. "You scared of thunder?" "Used to be," she admitted. "Now I'm only scared of silence." He stopped drying his hair, studying her face. "Silence?" She nodded. "In that place, silence meant someone was gone. Either sold or worse. So I learned to listen for noise, footsteps, whispers, anything. It meant I was still alive." Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to say something to ease the pain in her voice, but no words seemed right. Instead, he nodded once. "Well, you won't find much silence here. The rooster starts yelling before sunrise and the barn creaks all night." Ilara smiled faintly. "That sounds nice." The power flickered once, then went out completely. Daniel sighed. "Figures." He grabbed a lantern from the shelf and lit it, the warm glow filling the room. The storm outside grew louder, rain hammering against the roof. They sat together at the kitchen table again, the lantern light casting soft shadows across their faces. Ilara traced the edge of the wooden surface with her fingers. "Why did you really save me?" she asked suddenly. "You said it wasn't about buying me, but people don't risk everything for strangers." Daniel stared into the lantern flame. "Maybe it's because you reminded me of her, your daughter?" He nodded slowly. "When I saw you standing there, I couldn't stop thinking, what if that was Lily? What if someday someone looked at her the way those men looked at you?" His voice shook slightly. "I couldn't walk away from that." Ilara's eyes filled with tears. "Then you're a better man than most." He gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe just a desperate one." The storm raged outside, thunder rolling like an angry drum. Ilara stood and walked toward the window, watching the rain pour down in silver sheets. Daniel joined her, the two of them standing side by side in the dim glow. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked quietly. He looked at her. "Leaving where?" "This place, this life." "The pain," he exhaled slowly. "Every day. But then I remember if I left, Lily wouldn't know where to find me." Something in his answer broke her a little. She turned toward him, tears threatening again. "You really love her?" "More than anything." For a long time they stood there listening to the storm. It wasn't awkward, It was raw, honest, two broken souls finding comfort in shared silence. When the rain finally eased, Daniel set a pot of coffee on the stove. Alara sat nearby, her legs pulled up against her chest, wrapped in the same blanket from the night before. She looked so young in that moment, almost childlike. "Do you think she'll come home?" she asked softly. Daniel's eyes flicked to the window, to the faint moonlight breaking through the clouds. "I have to believe she will," he said, "because if I stop believing, then I've already lost her." Alara nodded, understanding more than he knew. She had lived her whole life clinging to hope that had long stopped making sense. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, warm and familiar. Daniel poured 2 cups, sliding one toward her. She wrapped her hands around it, savoring the heat. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he admitted, "but as long as you're here, you're safe." "That's a promise." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I believe you." Hours later, when Daniel went to check on her, he found her asleep on the couch, the empty cup beside her and the blanket pulled up to her chin. Her face was peaceful, almost innocent again. He stood there for a long time, just watching her breathe. Then he turned toward the window, his hand brushing against the old photograph of Lily. He touched the glass gently, his voice barely audible. "I'll find you, sweetheart. I swear it." Outside, the storm had passed. The air was cool, washed clean by rain. Somewhere in the distance, a new dawn was waiting, one that neither of them yet knew would bring both danger and redemption. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something other than loss. He didn't know what to call it, maybe faith, maybe purpose, but it burned quietly in his chest. And as Alara slept, safe beneath his roof, Daniel realized that rescuing her hadn't been an accident. It had been destiny's way of reminding him, even in the darkest places, light could still find a way in.